Good morning. I've said many times that I'm going to always have honest conversations with the people of South Dakota, no matter how hard they might be. Today is one of those days. We've had several protests across the state of South Dakota because of what happened to George Floyd while he was in the custody of the Minneapolis police. I want to talk a little bit about what we can learn from that situation and what our path forward can be. As I said on Monday, protests have a purpose. People protest when they feel like they're not being heard. As it relates to South Dakota, the protests have had their purpose. There is no one who thinks that what happened to George Floyd was okay. Personally, I haven't even been able to make it through the video yet. It has been gut-wrenching to watch. The question before us now, today in South Dakota, is what do we want policing to look like? That's at all levels, at the city level, the state level, county level, and federal level. There's no governor in America that has trusted her people more than I have. I trusted them to make the right choices, and the last several months they have done so. There's no governor in America who is more willing to work with her people than I am, to work to find solutions to the problems that we face, to be that policing or otherwise. It's time for us to work together to problem solve. Now, the very reason that I ran for office years ago was because of what happened to my family when my dad passed away. Because of that, I got engaged in public service, ran for the legislature, represented you in Congress, and now I'm your governor. I grew up with a dad who was a cowboy who told us every single day, you don't complain about things, you fix them. Now, every step along the way throughout public service, I focused on problem solving. I came back to South Dakota because I wanted to have an even bigger impact on our state, and I wanted to be of service to the people here. Frankly, I realized when I was in Congress how little gets done at the federal level, and that the state and the local government can have a much greater impact on people's everyday lives. For example, policing is a state and a local issue. The vast majority of police officers are local, they're not federal, and the laws that they enforce are local, not federal. If we want to change the nature of policing, then we must lead on that ourselves. So let me be blunt. Public policy is complex. It's difficult. It also should be dispassionate. Passion tells us what we need to focus on, but not how we ought to do it. Our form of government is one that is intentionally designed to be thoughtful and deliberative. It is set up that way so that all voices can be heard, all issues can be weighed, and that all consequences, intentional and unintentional, can be fleshed out before we make the law. Now, I've spent a lot of time working in public policy, and the one lesson that I've learned is this, that what we need in this country, what we need in South Dakota, is more freedom and a lot more respect for each other. And while freedom and respect won't solve all of our problems, it does present a better path towards where we want to go. Freedom focuses our policies on persuasion and an intellectual strength of the positions that we have, not control or coercion or the heavy hand of government. We should never be afraid to share our views or to hear the views of other people. And if we don't like what we hear, the answer is that we share our own view or we just ignore it. We do not silence it. If someone is interested in the common good in all of its iterations and complexities, freedom is the one and only choice. That freedom, coupled with respect for those who have differing views, is a foundation on which we can build real change. Now, in America, the street doesn't settle or resolve this policing question or any other public policy question in front of us. Rather, it's hard work. We study, we review, we debate, we negotiate, and we accommodate. Then we decide what is the best action for us. City councils, county commissions, and the state legislature, they're all open for business and open for ideas. Sit down and study the laws that you have. Dispassionately evaluate what is working and what isn't working. Then contact your representatives, express your beliefs and what you want to see happen to drive the change that you want. Now, one-liners on social media are not the answer. People need to ask themselves, what are the facts? What are the consequences? And what can history teach us? Again, this process is deliberative, so we must take the time to do the hard work of looking at these things from all different angles. And one thing that I have noticed in the public discourse in America today is the immediacy of it all. Social media and the internet today have made it very easy for us to communicate with each other, instantly, in fact. That's a great tool, but it's also made it easy to communicate thoughtlessly. In the race to be heard, so many of us have given up on trying to make an argument. Instead, we compete to see who can shout the loudest. Now, America is a place where every voice deserves to be heard. Free speech is one of our most fundamental rights. I see legitimate protests raising important concerns, and I hear those concerns. But I also see violent actors who are trying to do an end run around public discourse. This is done to intimidate, and it's done to silence voices. These folks want to shortcut public debates through fear. They want to make people scared, and that is un-American. It has no place in the state of South Dakota. Now, our nation has several major issues to address. There's only so much that Congress or the president can do. However, there is a principle in this country that's called federalism. Now, our founding fathers wisely gave limited authority to the federal government, knowing that the different needs and issues of each state and community would need to be addressed differently. South Dakotans get the first chance to decide what's best for South Dakotans, and we have the responsibility to make sure that our communities are secure, that our rights are protected, and that starts here at home. This brings us to the biggest lesson that I have learned in public policy. There is no institution in this state that is more important than the family. We are blessed with great families in this state. Whatever your family looks like, make sure that it is a strong one. I say that because what took place on Sunday night in Sioux Falls, after the peaceful protest was over and concluded and people had gone home, it showed us that some of our families need a lot more attention. Parents, you need to know if your kids are out at night throwing rocks at cops. Siblings, brothers and sisters, you need to know if your family members are out looting and vandalizing businesses. And grandparents, you need to know if your grandkids are intentionally trying to destroy our way of life. Violence is never the answer. Violence will not be tolerated by me, and it should not be tolerated by you. Now, South Dakota has an opportunity to be different from every other state, but that requires us to be bold. That means that we need to respect each other. It means that we need to listen to each other, and we need to work together to make sure that we have the right path forward. So with that, I'll take any questions that you might have.
Governor, this is Stephen Groves from the AP.
Sure, Stephen, go ahead.
I wonder, with this, what specific actions with your administration are you looking at taking, examining police tactics in the state?
Well, obviously, it's a complex issue, and it's something that we're going to work on, but we're not going to also prejudge solutions as they are brought forward to us. That being said, there are a couple suggestions that have already come forward. One of them is looking at contract negotiations, how they work with police unions. I saw a statistic yesterday that said 25% of police officers that had been fired for certain reasons had appealed and gotten their jobs back. I think we should be examining those kind of policies and see if they're appropriate. Also, at the state level, we'll be looking at civil asset forfeiture laws and see if that needs to be examined. But those are just a couple of suggestions that we could tackle. I know at the federal level, qualified immunity might be something that needs to be dealt with. So we are sitting down with an open mind, examining the data and the facts around each of these policies and wondering if there is reforms that could be necessary to create a much better situation into the future.
Governor Noem, this is Ariel with the Journal.
Sure, go ahead, Ariel.
Sure. So my question is about one of these specific policies. So right now in South Dakota, body camera footage that, the taxpayers pay for, it's not a public record, and we basically never see them. Other states have laws that say, if that maybe they're always a public record upon request, or they must be available during a use of force incident involving fatal use of force. Are you open? I mean, obviously this would have to come from the legislator, but would you encourage laws to make body camera footage more available? And the argument for this is that when there's a good call made by police, it helps with confidence. But if there is a bad call, like we saw in Minnesota, then the public should know that. What's your stance on that issue?
I think it's an issue we should examine. I do know that many of our police officers throughout the state don't have body cameras at this time, but if it is available, it's an option we should examine.
Okay, thank you.
Governor Megan Murad, News Center 1.
Sure, go ahead, Megan.
What conversations have you had so far with local leaders in discussing any policy changes that should be necessary?
We've told them that we're open to their ideas that they may see in their local communities and in their cities. Told them that we would be looking for potential reforms that would really have a long-term effect. I think for decades we've had these issues going on, and we're still in other states and other communities seeing instances like what happened to George Floyd. And so we need to be problem solvers and come forward with policies that really make a difference this time.
Follow-up, have you received any feedback so far or suggestions or anything on those reforms like you mentioned?
No, I would say that most of these local leaders are focused on keeping their communities safe, keeping the violent protests out, and protecting their families and businesses that live there. They recognize that the peaceful protests have made their point in the state, and that we would call for the violent activity to stop.
Governor, this is Stephen Groves from the AP again.
Sure, go ahead, Stephen.
You had mentioned the right to protest and freedom of expression, and we've all seen photos of Confederate flags being flown by anti-protesters in Rapid City. I wonder if you could tell us, with that and how that fits in with the right to expression, while flying a symbol that was a regime that limited or took away people's freedom.
Yeah, I saw videos of those flags and was very disappointed to see them. I do know that freedom of speech is a fundamental right of being an American, and that should be protected, but it was disappointing for me to see those.
Governor JP from KORN News Radio.
Yep, go ahead, JP.
Thank you very much. How concerned are you regarding members of the community possibly taking the law into their own hands in dealing with unruly protesters or rioters?
I think it's unfortunate that the local community may feel the need to protect themselves, but that also is a constitutionally protected right that they have. But I do believe that in South Dakota, we are going to be that example and not have any more violence, that our people will step up and recognize the right thing to do is to sit down at the table, to start a conversation and be problem solvers.
Thank you, Governor.
This is Lisa with the Argus Leader.
Sure, go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, as you're implementing changes and looking at changes, are you expecting any pushback from law enforcement and police departments in the state?
There's always going to be two sides of every policy and how it's viewed. There's consequences and unintentional consequences. And I think that my legislative background, being in the state legislature, being in Congress, and now as governor, recognize that there is, no matter what debate you're having, there will always be another viewpoint. And so I'm expecting that there will be another perspective, and I'm willing to listen to it. But at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we don't have any situations in South Dakota like they saw in Minneapolis. Bob?
Governor, another question from...
I'm going to go to Bob quick, and then I'll go back to the phone.
Governor Bob Mercer from Keloland News. The State Attorney General oversees the Law Enforcement Standards Commission. Are you in conversation with Attorney General Ronsberg? And secondly, about this issue? And then secondly, have you made any recommendations to him about what you might want to see or things that he should consider?
Yeah, the Attorney General and my team are in conversations every day about different issues going on in South Dakota. And he has been a leader on different types of reforms when it comes to law enforcement throughout the state and also accountability. So I'm sure he's very interested in sitting down and working on this with me but he is obviously quite busy the last couple of days as well. And we're not in legislative session right now, and we anticipate that most of the solutions will require legislative action. But getting prepared for that and making sure it's a wise statute to pursue is incredibly important. So we'll be proactive in making sure we're doing that as soon as possible. Let's go to the phone. Was that Stephen?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
I was wondering if you've received a request from the president to send South Dakota National Guard troops to D.C. or anywhere else, and if so, if you plan on sending any of those troops there.
No, not that I'm aware of. We have not received a request to send our National Guard outside of state borders.
Governor Patrick Callahan, South Dakota Broadcasters, follow up on Mr. Mercer's question there. Are you prepared to put funding or recommend funding for these reforms, such as equipping officers with body cams universally and measures such as that may come about as a result of measures suggested?
It'd be difficult for me to make that commitment today, not knowing the cost, and especially in light of the budget situation we're looking at because of the COVID-19 virus that spread across the state of South Dakota and how it's impacted our economy. But I think that there is discussions ongoing. Some smaller departments and different entities within police departments do have body cams, and we'll be visiting with them about costs, how they facilitate it, how they utilize them, and what can be done in the potential there.
Governor Bob Mercer, Keloland News again. Just to follow up on the use of the National Guard in South Dakota. I'm aware of 3 communities, I believe, where they are dispersed. Did the mayors or commissions of those cities request the Guard's presence? And secondly, are they anywhere else in South Dakota at this time?
I was able to have those Guard members on state active duty, which allowed me to pre-deploy them to communities so that they would be poised and ready when the local leadership asked for their assistance. So, and yes, they have been engaged in these communities and will continue to stay available to us. They have specialized training that's helpful in crowd control and situations that could potentially turn violent, yet they are only there to assist local law enforcement. So it is when local law enforcement and that mayor of that community or that leader in that community asks, that's when they come in and they assist. And they're usually in a supporting role, although they are trained security personnel and military police.
This is Lisa with the Argus Leader.
Sure, go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, is the National Guard still activated in Sioux Falls?
There is a presence still in Sioux Falls, and we do have a presence in Rapid City and a small presence here in Pierre. And then the other entities will continue to evaluate. We literally have a conversation every couple of hours on where we think we may need extra assistance and backup.
Governor Noem, this is Ariel again.
Sure, go ahead.
Has the Highway Patrol's plane been being used? Multiple people reported seeing a plane circling Rapid City last night.
The Highway Patrol plane has been utilized, although I won't specifically tell you where it's been utilized.
Okay.
This is Lisa with the Argus Leader.
Sure, go ahead.
Just wondering if you've heard any suggestions from legislators and if you've had any discussions about changes that could be made.
Not specific changes, just a willingness to work on the issue. And I'm sure they were focused on their elections yesterday And then now, going into the general election, they'll be ready to hit the ground running.
Governor Lee Strubinger, SCPB.
Sure, go ahead, Lee.
I was wondering if you had any updates on whether or not a lawsuit would be filed on over the tribal checkpoints or not.
There is still continuing to be action, and I'll keep you posted, Lee. I think there is some discussions ongoing with BIA as to options that we might have available.
Governor Noem, Adam, St. Paul, Dakota Broadcasting.
Sure, go ahead, Adam.
Just wondering, and I don't know if you've released a statement on this or addressed it specifically yet or not. I was just wondering if you have a message to the African American community in South Dakota specifically, on their feelings and on, of course, the tragedy that we're speaking about right now.
Absolutely. I would love to engage them in solutions and ask for their help to make sure it was a solution that would really make a difference far into the future. And I would remind folks as to the diversity of my personal family and that I care deeply about this issue as well, and would ask that they help us make sure the policy is appropriate. Okay. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll visit with you tomorrow.